everyone. A warm welcome to each one of you all today. It's a privilege for me to introduce our first speaker, Helen Bowie. She's from Zonta Club Wellington, District 16, New Zealand. She's a member of Zonta International Advocacy Committee from 2018 to 2020. She was also the advocacy chair of Zonta International District 16, New Zealand. In her day job, Helen is a commercial lawyer at Chapman Triff Solicitors. She's also a member of the New Zealand Council of Legal Education. It's past midnight, nearing 1 a.m. in New Zealand. Thank you, Helen, for staying up so late for this presentation. Over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Can you all hear me okay? Julie, can you tell me you're okay? And I'm going to try and share my screen. And Julie, if you just tell me if I do this correctly and that you see the full presentation. So I'm just going to try this now. Can you see that in full screen, Julie? Can you just nod if that's correct? Yep. Okay, we're good to go. And so it's been a big week. One of the things that happened last week is that Michelle Yeoh won the Academy Award for Best Actress. And I was very interested to see that immediately after she received that award, the New York Times published a guest essay written by her. Now, is it going to work?
Oh, there you go.
If I may interrupt, are you trying to change your slide?
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. There we go. Yeah. So I'll just say that again. And I was very interested to see that immediately after she received that award, the New York Times published a guest essay written by her on the very topic that we are discussing today. In that essay, she says, and I quote, "I'm 60 years old and I just won my first Oscar. I know something about perseverance, and I am all too aware of what society expects of women. I'm also well aware that my experience can't compare at all with that of the women heroes I met who are on the front lines of crises. But I can do one thing with this moment of my professional joy. And if I can do one thing with this moment of my professional joy, it would be to point the spotlight on those who all too often go unacknowledged, the women who are rebuilding their communities, taking care of children and older people, and putting food on the table. Let's make sure they are not missing from the room when decisions are being made that affect them the most." So I highly recommend this entire essay to you, which traverses the effects of disasters, including climate change disasters, on women's lives and the importance of women in decision-making roles. The essay dovetails precisely with what I am going to talk about today, albeit that my focus will be on the recent experiences of a small corner of the South Pacific, namely my country, New Zealand. So today I'm going to cover 4 things: the recent climate change-driven disaster affecting New Zealand, namely Cyclone Gabrielle, the importance of women in leadership and climate change decision-making, the importance of statistics that women are counted, and the importance of fair and equitable settings in all aspects of women's employment. I'm going to start with Cyclone Gabrielle. So there it is on a satellite view of our edge of the globe. Cyclone Gabrielle is one of the worst storms to hit New Zealand in living history. Between the 12th and 14th of February this year, parts of New Zealand recorded rainfall amounts of 300 to 400 millimetres, wind gusts of 130 to 140 kilometres per hour, and waves were recorded as high as 11 metres along some of our coasts. The cyclone was preceded by another cyclone, which hit New Zealand on the 27th of January. So the land was already saturated in many places, and many people were still recovering from the previous cyclone when Cyclone Gabrielle hit. 11 people lost their lives as a result of Cyclone Gabrielle. It is estimated that the cyclone displaced 10,500 households by landslips, flooding, and tidal surge. Many roads, including state highways, became impassable. Communications, including cell phone communications, were cut off in areas across the northern and eastern parts of the country, and power supplies were cut off for days and in some cases, weeks. The cost to recover is estimated to be in the region of $13 billion. To put this into perspective, we are an OECD country of just over 5 million people. This cost of the recovery is massive for our economy. So these recent extreme events have been a real wake-up call for New Zealand. We don't usually have cyclones of this magnitude and intensity come this far south in the South Pacific. The climate scientists who have studied the models and the actual events tell us that Cyclone Gabrielle was supercharged by climate change. And I hasten to add that I'm very conscious that New Zealand isn't the only country recently affected by extreme weather. Since Cyclone Gabrielle a month ago, our newsfeed has been filled with news of the effects of extreme weather in Vanuatu, California, Turkey, and Peru, to name a few. The short point is that climate change is not a future issue. It affects people, and in particular vulnerable populations, everywhere around the world today. So I want to talk a little bit now about the importance of women in leadership and climate change decision making. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change states that better integration of women into decision making at all levels related to climate change helps improve climate mitigation and adaptation policies. I think that proposition is generally accepted. There is evidence now that a higher proportion of female representation in Parliament leads countries to adopt more stringent climate change policies. It's interesting to examine those findings against the New Zealand experience. New Zealand now has a majority of women members of its Parliament. So there are just over 50% of members of Parliament in New Zealand who are women. The New Zealand Parliament has enacted a Zero Carbon Act, which includes a commitment to the 1.5 degree target, as well as net zero emissions target and yearly emissions budgets. So that is generally positive. Our former Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, was a very strong advocate for progress on climate change. She championed the view that New Zealand had an opportunity to shape its identity by making the transition to reduced emissions. However, agricultural sector emissions account for 50% of New Zealand's overall greenhouse gas emissions. And the agricultural sector is currently not included in the emissions trading scheme. This exclusion is a major point of criticism from the experts. and this matter is the subject of much discussion, given the importance of agriculture to our country. It will be interesting to see how Cyclone Gabrielle shifts the thinking regarding the need for emissions reduction. Already, the political polls show a boost in support for the Green Party since Cyclone Gabrielle, no doubt brought about by the spectre of the need for more urgency in the reduction in emissions. In any event, when the mitigation strategies are debated in Parliament, it is good to know that we have a strong women's voice. I want to mention also that the government here will shortly introduce new legislation dealing with disaster readiness, response, and recovery. Zonta District 16, which is the Zonta District for New Zealand, has advocated that this new legislation be drafted having regard to gender issues. I want to talk next about the importance of statistics. Zonta District 16's research over the last several years has indicated a relative paucity of clear and accurate publicly available information about women's social needs, violence against women, and aspects of women's employment. This lack of information regarding the status of women is particularly concerning, especially where critical policy decisions are being made by government about funding allocation after a crisis, such as a climate change disaster. We have advocated for the government to build robust and regularly updated data sets recording the status and experience of women in New Zealand. In times of national crisis, whether economic, health, or natural disaster events, impacts on women need to be measured against reliable baselines. It is often said, what gets measured gets done. Women will repeatedly miss out in the recovery phases unless clear and publicly available data is readily available to track their progress. We have written in the past to our Minister of Women about this issue, and I think it is fair to say that the government has made significant strides in improving data in this space. It's very important that the data covers Maori, Pacifica women, women with disabilities, women of different ages, and other demographics. And going forward, it is important that the information be readily obtained when the next crisis inevitably occurs. I want to talk about women's employment now. Events such as Cyclone Gabrielle place a spotlight on a number of areas where fair and equitable settings in employment are critical to improve the resilience of women across New Zealand. The New Zealand government has been proactive in this space, initiating a women's employment action plan. Zonta made a submission supporting this plan and making suggestions as to how it could grow over time. As we enter the recovery phase of Cyclone Gabrielle, a variety of circumstances have conflated to put extreme pressures on the supply of workers, particularly in the trades. Such pressures are also likely to emerge in the recovery phase of any climate change disaster, or for that matter, any natural disaster in New Zealand that has a significant impact on infrastructure and other property. The training of women for good jobs and trades that have been traditionally male-dominated makes very good sense from a New Zealand Inc. perspective. We know that women experience barriers to joining trades where they are traditionally underrepresented. These barriers include lack of knowledge about opportunities and pathways, male-dominated workplace culture, and in some cases, lack of sector or workplace support for women, including ensuring that workplaces have appropriate facilities and are safe for women. At Zonta District 16, we have advocated for a shift in attitudes about women, including young women taking jobs in trades. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate some of the points I've made. The recent tragic Cyclone Gabrielle, has brought devastation to our country. It's an unprecedented event, and it reminds us that climate change is here and is part of our future. I think we are lucky in New Zealand to have a government with strong representation of women, with now just over 50% women members of our parliament. There are opportunities for strong women's voices to be heard as legislation is passed regarding climate mitigation and adaptation. And Zonta District 16 will continue to make submissions advocating for the advancement of women in this space. Two areas of our focus in which the New Zealand government is responding to are as follows. Building robust and regularly updated data sets recording the status and experience of women in New Zealand. This will ensure reliable baselines to inform decision-making when the next crisis occurs. We firmly believe what gets measured gets done. And finally, ensuring fair and equitable settings in employment across opportunities, skills, and pay. Improving these settings is critical to improve the resilience of women across New Zealand, particularly in the aftermath of a climate change disaster. Thanks very much.